The Nwabas lived on top of a hill in Hibiscus Estate, a place where the air smelled of imported perfumes and garden roses, and the silence was broken only by birds or the gentle hum of electric gates. Their mansion stood like a palace, ivory pillars, tinted windows, and a swimming pool that glittered even at night. Their youngest daughter, Amaka, was nothing like the world she was born into. At 21, she had a softness that hadn't been rubbed away by privilege. While her elder siblings took weekend trips to London and ordered maids around like soldiers, Amaka found comfort in simpler things, reading in the garden, journaling at cafes, and taking long walks outside the estate gates. It was one such walk on a drizzling Tuesday afternoon that she first saw the old woman. The woman sat hunched near the dump site, her back curved like a dried banana leaf. She was wrapped in layers of threadbare cloth, her feet swollen and dusty. Her skin, dark and withered, seemed to absorb the gray of the sky. Amaka, wearing a silk scarf and sneakers that cost more than some people's monthly salary, stopped and watched her. Their eyes met. The woman's eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone that frail, but they softened when she saw Amaka's pity. "Good afternoon, Mama," Amaka greeted. The old woman nodded. "Afternoon, daughter. You have a kind face." Amaka reached into her purse and gave her 1,000 naira note. "Buy food," she said gently. The woman grinned with crooked teeth. "You are light, not like the others. May your days be long." Two weeks after their first encounter, the old woman had become a part of Amaka's routine. She sat in the same place every afternoon, near the rusting face behind St. Lazarus Cemetery, a 10-minute walk from the gates of Hibiscus Estate. Amaka began to stop by more often, each time with bottled water, bread, or small cash. They exchanged pleasantries, short stories, sometimes silence. One afternoon, the old woman stood before Amaka could greet her. "My name is Mama Ebeji," she said. "I'm Amaka," the girl replied, smiling. "But I guess you already know that." "I know many things," Mama Ebeji said, her voice cracking like old leather. "Like how your hands don't like hard work. They are soft, like your mother's are." Amaka blinked. "You knew my mother?" Mama Ebeji smiled and looked away. "I know things." It was the first of many cryptic things the old woman would say. Amaka started bringing her dirty clothes in a large bag. She couldn't say why. Maybe guilt, maybe a desire to help more. She offered Mama Ebeji money to wash them. The woman accepted eagerly, her eyes lighting up like flames. Her hands, though wrinkled and ebony, moved with strength and speed. The clothes always returned too clean, even the stains that their industrial machines couldn't remove. Lipstick on sleeves, curry sauce on silk, mud on wet jeans were scrubbed out like the garments had never been worn. "Your hands are magic," Amaka said once. Mama Ebeji grinned and said nothing. Amaka never told her parents. Her father, Chief Nwaba, was a hard man who viewed the poor as liabilities, and her mother, Ijoma, rarely left the saloon or spa. They would never understand. But the housemaid Adaobi noticed. "Omo, where do you wash your clothes these days?" Adaobi asked, folding a blouse. "They smell like bush herbs." "Herbs?" Amaka sniffed a t-shirt and shrugged. "I just asked someone to help me, a nice old woman." Adaobi stiffened. "Old woman from where?" "Near the cemetery." The housemaid's face fell. "You better be careful. That area is a bad place. People say strange things about that zone." Amaka laughed it off. "You and your filmy fears." But that night, she dreamed of a forest made of arms, thin, wrinkled arms, rising from the ground like trees, all reaching for her. The next morning, Amaka sat in the garden, sipping ginger tea and brushing off the strange dream. The air smelled of wet earth. It had rained overnight, and the sky still held the color of smoke. She opened her journal to write, but the words didn't come easily. Her thoughts kept circling Mama Ebeji, the herbal smell in her clothes, The comment about her mother, the dream of reaching arms. As if summoned by her thoughts, Adaobi approached. "Auntie," she said cautiously, "you have a visitor, an old woman." Amaka's brows rose. "Here?" Adaobi nodded. "She's at the gate." Amaka stood, her heart beating faster. She hadn't told Mama Ebeji where she lived. She walked to the front gate barefoot, a silk robe dragging slightly against the tiled floor. Through the tinted glass of the estate's entrance, she saw Mama Ebeji standing calmly, holding a plastic bag full of freshly washed clothes. "I finished early," the old woman said, "so I've come to give them to you myself." Amaka hesitated, then opened the gate halfway. "Mama, how did you know where I lived?" Mama Ebeji chuckled. "I followed the scent of your kindness." The answer unsettled her, but she accepted the bag and thanked her politely. "You didn't have to come all the way." "I had to," Mama Ebeji said, her voice low. "I don't like what's coming." "What do you mean?" But the old woman was already walking away, her frame vanishing around the corner of the gate like mist. That night, as the Nwaba household settled into its usual quiet, a sudden scream broke through the silence. It was Adaobi. Amaka and the guards rushed to her tiny quarters in the staff compound. The housemaid sat on the floor, her hands shaking. Her eyes were wide with fear. "I've seen something under my bed. A hand, old black hand. It reached out, it scratched my leg." They searched but found nothing, only faint claw marks on the tiled floor and 3 thin scratches on Adaobi's ankle. "She's been watching you," Adaobi whispered to Amaka later, clutching her rosary. "That woman, she's not ordinary. I've seen her eyes. She's similar to the one who was in my village." Amaka wanted to laugh, to tell Adaobi she had watched too many horror films, but then, not after the dream, not after the strange cleansing of her clothes, not after Mama Ebeji found her house without being told. Amaka could not laugh. She didn't sleep that night, and by morning she discovered something chilling. In the freshly returned laundry bag, beneath her pressed blouse, was a small white feather smeared with something red. The feather lay still on Amaka's bed, thin and strange, like it had once belonged to a bird that never flew. The red smear on it wasn't paint. The scent was metallic, sharp and thick. Amaka's throat tightened. She used a tissue to pick it up and dropped it into the waste bin. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, unmoving for several minutes, trying to tell herself it was nothing. But deep inside, a seed of fear had been planted. She didn't visit Mama Ebeji for several days. Instead, she tried to distract herself, went shopping with her mother, scrolled endlessly on her phone, even accepted an invitation to a church service from a college friend. But nothing stopped the dreams. Now they came more frequently, always in the same place, a forest with no trees, just arms, thin wrinkled arms. They grew from the ground and whispered in languages she didn't know. One night a voice spoke clearly above the rest. "She wears your scent now. You are becoming hers." Amaka woke up, drenched in sweat, her hands trembling. Meanwhile, Adaobi had grown paranoid. She walked around with anointing oil and sprinkled it over Amaka's door each morning. "You don't believe me, but that woman is not good. She is a spirit. So I used this anointing oil to protect you from her." Amaka finally confronted her. "How do you even know all this?" Adaobi bit her lower lip. "Because I've seen it before in my village. A woman who cleaned people's clothes, and with every wash, she washed away part of their soul. My cousin was one of them. After 1 year, she started talking to shadows, and then..." "Enough!" Amaka snapped. "You are scaring me for no reason." Adaobi lowered her eyes, but whispered one last thing. "Just watch if anything of yours starts disappearing." Amaka didn't want to believe her, but she went to close her closet anyway. She counted her blouses, her skirts, her scarves. She checked her under drawer. That was when she noticed it. A gold bracelet gifted to her by her late grandmother was gone. She hadn't worn it in months, but it had always stayed in a little box on her vanity table. She searched the entire room. Nothing. Her heart thudded against the ribs. Suddenly, she remembered something odd. The last time she sent clothes to Mama Ebeji, she had tossed in a few old scarves, and the old box had accidentally fallen into the laundry bag. She had meant to peel it out, but forgot. Amaka didn't sleep that night. At 6 a.m., she slipped into jeans and a hoodie and left for the estate before the drivers woke up. She walked past the cemetery where stray goats grazed, and wind blew dust into her eyes. She found the old woman's usual spot, empty. Only an empty bucket and a bundle of clothes remained. Then she noticed the ashes, a faint pile, still warm, like something had been burned not long ago. She looked closer. Among the ashes was the twisted, melted outline of her bracelet, and beside it, scrawled in ash, were 5 words: "You gave it to me." Amaka stood frozen, staring at the scorched ground. The ashes felt like they were breathing. The message "you gave it to me" wasn't written with fingers. It was traced with something sharper, something that dug into the earth like a claw. She backed away, nearly tripping on a stone. A cow cawed above her, loud and sudden. She turned and ran. Her feet pounded the dusty road, her chest tight. When she finally reached the gate of Hibiscus Estate, the security men opened the barrier with a confused look. They weren't used to seeing the chief's daughter sweating, dusty, and frantic at that hour. Inside the house, the air smelled too clean, too still. She ran straight to her room, locked the door, and broke down crying on the floor. Her head spun. The bracelet, the dreams, the feather, the ash. This was no longer just a strange old woman. Something dark was uncoiling. For 2 days, Amaka refused to leave her room. She claimed she was fasting and needed solitude. Her mother was too distracted with a wedding planning committee to notice. Her father was away on a business trip. Only Adaobi knew the truth, or pieces of it. "She's not done," Adaobi said quietly through the door one morning. "She's still holding something that belongs to you." Amaka unlocked the door and pulled the maid inside. "What do I do, Adaobi? What does she want?" Adaobi looked frightened but firm. "People like that don't want money. They want connection. They want access. She used the washing to build it. She's been washing you into her world spiritually." Amaka's hands trembled. "I just wanted to help. I felt sorry for her. Some people wear pity like perfume, but she wore yours like blood." They stayed in silence. Then Adaobi said, "We have to go see someone, a woman in Ikpa town. She's not a prophet. She's older than that." Amaka hesitated. "Like Asiya?" Adaobi looked her in the eye. "Like the kind Mama Ebeji fears." They left that night in an Ube. Adaobi booked with her own money. The car drove out of Dakori city and into the more forested outer towns. After an hour, they arrived at Ikpa, a sleepy, dusty place full of rusted zinc rooftops and scent leaves drying on strings. They walked through bush paths until they reached a clay hut with painted symbols on the wall. The woman who opened the door had cataract eyes but didn't need sight to see. "Why did you bring her?" she asked. "Adaobi." Before either of them could speak, "She has already been touched." Amaka's mouth went dry. Can you help me?" The old woman sniffed the air around her. "You smell like soap made from shadow." She motioned from them to enter. Inside the hut, the air was thick with herbs and wood smoke. Charms hung from the ceiling. In the center of the room was a shallow clay bowl filled with ashen bones. "She's not what you think," the woman said. "She's not an old woman. She's an Ebeji, a spirit born of a twin who died in the womb, cast to wander alone. She latches onto kindness and uses it to anchor herself in the living world." Amaka whispered, "So all this time? You gave her your pity, then your clothes, then your scent. Now part of your soul walks with her." Tears burned Amaka's eyes. The woman looked into the ashes and sprinkled something dark into the bowl. "Do you want her to leave you?" "Yes," Amaka said. "Then you must ask her for everything she took. If she returns it freely, you may break the tie. If she refuses..." "What if she refuses?" Amaka asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman raised her eyes. "Then the only way to break her is to make her shed her disguise, to make her show her true face." That night, Amaka couldn't sleep. Even after returning from Ikpa with a protective charm tied around her wrist and powdered ash smeared lightly on her forehead, she felt a heavy presence hanging in the air of her room. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch when she blinked. Her mirror shimmered faintly like something watched from the other side. Adaobi stayed nearby, refusing to let Amaka sleep alone. She placed a Bible under Amaka's pillow and whispered old Igbo prayers her grandmother used to say. "Sleep, small auntie," she said, her voice tired. The woman said we should confront her and not fear her. That's the only way. But sleep never came. At 3 a.m., Amaka sat upright. A smell filled the room. Not perfume, not smoke. Soap. Old soap. Charcoal. Bitter leaves. Blood. Then a whisper. I was always nearby. The mirror on her vanity rippled like water. Then came another whisper. Adaobi's voice. "Amaka, don't look at it. She's testing you." But it was too late. Amaka turned toward the mirror and saw her. Not the hunched, rag-wrapped Mama Ebeji she had pitied. The figure in the mirror had no face, just wrinkled skin stretched endlessly like folded cloth over a skull. Its hands were long and bone-thin claws instead of fingers. From its chest, dozens of white feathers sprouted like broken wings. It tilted its head at her. Then it spoke without moving its mouth. "Why do you run from what you invited?" Amaka screamed. Adaobi jumped from her mat, grabbing the bottle of anointing oil and spraying it at the mirror. The glass cracked, a clean fracture down the center, and the reflection disappeared like smoke escaping a bottle. They didn't sleep for the rest of the night. By morning, Amaka had made up her mind. She would find Mama Ebeji and demand what belonged to her. Her bracelet, her soul thread, her peace. No more pity, no more avoidance. She would face the Ebeji and force it to shed its disguise in front of the living. She returned to the edge of St. Lazarus Cemetery at dusk, the same place they had first met. Adaobi followed a few paces behind, clutching her rosary. The spot was empty, the ashes were gone, but a voice greeted her from the shade of the fig tree. "You look thin," Mama Ebeji said, stepping into the light, "and older. My work is shaping you." Amaka took a deep breath. "I didn't come to talk. I came to ask for what's mine." The old woman smiled, eyes glittering. "You gave them to me." "No," Amaka said firmly. "I paid you. I never gave you permission to take anything else. Not my bracelet, not my dreams, not my soul." Then Mama Ebeji's voice turned sharp. "You came to me willingly. You gave without knowing the price. The rules were old long before you were born." Behind Amaka, Adaobi sprinkled salt in a circle and held up the small clay amulet from the Ikpasia. "If you don't return what you took," Amaka said, her voice shaking but clear, "I'll break the tie by unmasking you, right here in the land of the living." "Do not test me," Mama Ebeji growled. Her back hunched further, her fingers stretched unnaturally. "You are not afraid of me," Amaka said, stepping into the salt circle, "but you are afraid of being seen. Show them who you really are, I dare you." Around them, the wind rose, the grass trembled. Then it happened. Mama Ebeji screamed, a shriek that rattled the bones in Amaka's chest. Her skin peeled like cloth torn from her body. Her face melted into shadows with eyes. Her arms split into multiple limbs, each with talons dripping black water. Her voice was layered, young and old, male and female, living and dead. Adaobi fell to her knees weeping, and Amaka stood her ground. "You want my soul?" she shouted. "Take it with the truth on your face." But the creature couldn't. The salt, the amulet, the courage. It howled again, this time in pain, and with a flash of light that smelled of iron and fire, it vanished. The wind stopped. The shadows folded back into the ground. The cemetery returned to silence. And lying at Amaka's feet was her gold bracelet, no longer melted, just cold, waiting. For the first time in weeks, the house felt light. Amaka walked to sunlight that felt real, not the pale imitation that had filtered through the windows in recent days. Birds chirped, traffic hummed faintly beyond the estate walls, and for once her dreams had not been filled with whispers or reaching hands. The gold bracelet now sat untouched on her vanity. Its color had returned, but something inside her knew it was no longer just jewelry. It had survived something ancient. Adaobi had insisted they soak it in anointing oil and wrap it in white cloth before bringing it back. She said it was not enough to cleanse the body, you had to clean the memory too. That morning, Amaka and Adaobi burned the last of the Ikpa charm over a clay bowl in the garden. As the ashes drifted up, Amaka whispered a prayer she wasn't sure she believed in. "Whatever I called without knowing, I uncall it now." In the days that followed, life returned to normal, at least on the surface. Mrs. Nwaba threw a brunch for her society friends and spoke proudly of Amaka's sudden spiritual retreat. Mr. Nwaba, unaware of anything strange, returned from Abuja and gifted Amaka a brand new car, happy that she looked more grounded. But beneath it all, Amaka had changed. She no longer walked past the cemetery near the estate wall. She avoided laundry by hand, even if her clothes were stained, and she watched strangers more closely, especially the ones that seemed too still, too quiet, too eager to serve. She began attending the small evening mass at Sacred Crest Chapel downtown. Not because she felt holy, but because she needed the sound of human prayer to drown out the silence that the spirit had left behind. One evening, she and Adaobi sat outside watching the stars. "Do you think she's gone forever?" Amaka asked. Adaobi sipped her tea slowly. "Some spirits don't die, they just go quiet. Wait for another door." Amaka shivered. "That's not comforting, but it's the truth." They sat in silence a while longer. Then Amaka said, "Why me? Why did she choose me?" Adaobi replied, without looking up, "Because you were soft, kind, and alone, even in a full house. That's what they look for." Amaka nodded, the words sitting heavy in her chest. "I just wanted to help," she whispered. Adaobi smiled faintly. "Then next time, help with your eyes open." Later that night, Amaka stood in front of her mirror. She held the gold bracelet in her palm. It no longer hummed, no longer whispered, just metal again. She placed it back in its box carefully and locked it away. She turned to sleep. She noticed something in the mirror. Nothing unnatural, no clothes, no twisted reflection, just her face, older and stronger. Thank you so much for watching. This was indeed an interesting story. Let's meet again in the next one.